There are those that create content and those that deal with the business consequences of making it. Featuring live interviews with industry disruptors, we showcase the process and aftermath of creative content development. Content and Consequences is part of Rogue Matter, a digital content platform providing programming and entertainment that shatters boundaries and colors outside the lines. Join the movement. Go Rogue. RogueMatter.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Content and Consequences. I'm your host, Jordan Elizabeth Gelber, and today we have an amazing guest. The one and only Philip Gilpin is here, and he is paving the way for content creators around the world to become successful superstars in the entertainment industry. And he's become not only one of my good friends, but a wonderful partner of Aperture and all the great things that we're working on. Philip, I wish I had like a nice roll up or like a good music to bring you in, because I feel like you're such a disruptor in the space. But hello, welcome.
Well, hello, thank you. That's all very kind of you. I need to have you around with me to do all my introductions everywhere I go now.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, just add it to the list.
Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, it's so funny. I've heard about Catalyst when it was ITV Fest for so long. And then I heard about Catalyst, and then I heard about Philip Gilpin and Philip Gilpin and Philip Gilpin. Now I know you. And it's so crazy how long you've been in this space and how much you've been actively kind of paving the way for where we are today in the entertainment industry for content creators to have successful careers with their own content.
It has been a while. I can't believe it's been almost 20 years at this point. I've been in the industry. That's wild. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Time goes by. But for those that don't know who you are, why don't you introduce yourself? And I also have 20 years in the industry right now, and it's freaking weird. But yeah, please introduce yourself. Tell everybody who you are and what you do and your backstory.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Philip Gilpin Jr. I am the current executive director here at the Catalyst Story Institute. Backstory, born in and around Boston, grew up in Massachusetts, ended up going to college I was actually a physics and math geek. I was a science nerd my whole life and math nerd, wanted to figure out how the universe works, why it works the way it works, all that kind of stuff. And then ended up growing up in sports and the performing arts, kind of as side hobbies. And when it came time to go to college, you had to pick a real career, right? So I focused my degree on physics and math, but stayed in the performing arts, whether it was through writing, acting, sports. And then after college, decided to take a break, moved to LA for a few months. A friend had an apartment out there in Santa Monica, so I went out to spend the summer before I went back to grad school, and just kind of fell in love with the LA vibe and getting to know the people in the industry, and didn't go back to grad school. I stayed in the West Coast, got some random jobs, as you do. And then, as everybody seems to have this story in their industry career, had the randomness of events happen where I was playing a game of pool at Barney's Beanery in West Hollywood one night. And one of the people that were there playing with us was a woman who worked at HBO. She was switching departments from business affairs to finance and looking for somebody with a math-based brain to slot in and fill the business affairs position. So I said, sure, I want to work in the industry. That's why I'm out here. I was working at a hotel in Beverly Hills doing overnight shifts at the time at the front desk. Interviewed, and 4 weeks later I was working at HBO. And so I got to learn the industry from the contract perspective first, which was interesting. The specific job I had was as a participations analyst, which are all of these big, mysterious back-end deals you hear about on film and TV projects, back-end points and all that kind of stuff. And at the time, the series that we were focused on in our office were Sex and the City, Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, The Wire, Curb Your Enthusiasm. I was lucky. I got to be there kind of in the heyday, when Chris Albrecht was CEO. Carolyn Strauss was the number 2, and she was just a force to be reckoned with on the creative side. And she ended up, going on to produce Game of Thrones and other things. And it was real interesting to learn the industry from that business perspective. And after a few years, I started to realize that my job was to help HBO figure out how to make the most amount of money. And sometimes what that meant was not giving the talent what they deserved. And so that was an eye-opener for me. And I thought to myself, okay, do I really want to sit here for 20 more years on this end of the industry, figuring out how to, constantly make the contracts more lucrative for the studio and the network, or do I want to get back over onto the creative side? And so in 2006, I had a mutual friend that was involved with the folks that started what was called ITV Fest, the Independent Television Festival in LA. And my friend Adam introduced me to my other friend, Adam, also known as AJ Tesler. And him and his wife, Jenny, had started this festival on Sunset Boulevard in 06 that was focused solely on independent TV pilots. If you rewind all the way back to summer of 06, YouTube had not launched yet. And streaming wars were not even a thing that TV's networks took seriously. HBO laughed off streaming at the time. And I remember going to ITV Fest and thinking, wow, the internet and TV are, this is all going to be one day. And it's not that I came up with the idea. I was at a panel where they were discussing that topic, and they kind of put that light bulb into my brain. And I was like, oh my goodness, yes, TV and the internet are going to be the same thing like tomorrow, right? Well, here we are 15 years later, and we all know how that shook out. And I really liked the kind of rogue, renegade, forward-thinking, screw the industry, we're not going to wait around for everybody to find out what the future is vibe of ITV Fest, which was pretty cool. And so I got involved, got to know AJ and Jenny. And then a couple years later after that, I left the industry entirely, moved around a bit, went to ended up working in Vegas. And then, got a phone call that one of my family members was sick back home in Vermont. They needed some help. My family owns a bed and breakfast in Vermont. And so I went back to help out, ended up staying in Vermont, running the inn for a few years. And through the randomness twist of events, I ended up helping out at the local Chamber of Commerce. And one day they were asking the question of everybody in the community, hey, does anybody have any ideas on how we can attract more creative economy younger people to our Southern Vermont region? And I raised my hand and said, well, I know a friend who's got this festival thing in LA. Maybe they want to do it in Vermont. So I called up AJ in 2012 and said, hey, what's going on with it? At the time, him and his wife had some kids, and they were kind of transitioning out of running the festival. I'll take it over and we'll move it to Vermont. So we did, with the goal of it being more of a Sundance relationship vibe, a relationship building, kind of networking vibe. And it worked. And so we spent 6 years in Vermont, and it grew and it grew. And then it got a little too big for these small towns where there's only one movie theater or two hotels or whatever. And so I went on the road in 2018 and was looking for that Goldilocks place. We didn't want to go back to LA or the big city. We had left there originally because it was becoming a little too Hollywoody. There'd be 5,000 people at the festival, but there'd be 9 people sitting in a screening because nobody cared to watch anybody else's work. They just wanted to all show up, get their picture taken, and get an agent, right? Which was really all the annoying Hollywood people. And so we left that, went to Vermont, where we created what we called the asshole barrier, which is all the people from Hollywood who thought they were too good to travel to a place like Vermont automatically self-excluded themselves from our new community, which was great. So we ended up with just all the cool kids. And so when we were looking around for our permanent home in the last couple of years, we needed a place that had big city infrastructure, theaters, hotels, restaurants, an airport that you could fly into, but a small town vibe, something a little more central to both coasts. And so I started looking around the Midwest, and Minnesota has a long history in our industry. And Minneapolis-St. Paul obviously is too big of a city, so discovered Duluth up on the shores of Lake Superior, and here we are. It's been 3 years now already, which is incredible. Time flies, especially during a pandemic. So there is your birth to today's story that there are many other details in the middle that I can share later on the drunken version. So
I love that. We got the whole 360 look at the life of Philip Gilpin. First of all, I too grew up in New England. I like to say I was taken hostage and raised there, but a fellow New Englander. Nice. It's a whole different world. Like growing up in New England is a very different world than people, especially Boston. Boston, which is such a unique community. But also, I'm also a fellow math geek. I was a math minor in college, so I sympathize because what we were told. Yeah, what we were told to do, get a normal job. And we ended up just adding the normal practicalities of regular jobs, quote unquote, and bringing it to the entertainment industry. But I am sure that all the things that you learned at like your college level or the stuff that the pathway that you were going on has helped you look at this entertainment industry differently, which is why you've been able to stick out, I would assume.
Yeah, people constantly are asking, how does one go from physics and math into the creative industry? And I am constantly asking in response, I don't understand the difference between them.
Exactly.
I don't know who started this myth of left brain, right brain, creative versus analytic, but it needs to die a swift death. It drives me nuts. To me, the notion of screenwriting and being creative is so exactly the same thing as solving higher level physics and math problems. I can understand why people who don't get into, graduate level physics and math might think of it as just remote, boring analytical thought, because all you learn is multiplication tables and beginning calculus and stuff. It's like, oh, I'm just solving variables and whatnot. But when you start getting up into the higher level stuff, you're answering problems that don't have answers. And when you look at the process of writing a screenplay or a show, you start with a set of variables. You start with a story world, you start with characters, and your job is to write the most elegant solution of these characters and of this world that you've created in your mind out of nowhere. It's the same process when you're solving physics and math problems, to the point that when I was in my office one day working at HBO, my assistant out front overheard me geeking out with a former physics friend at the time on the phone. And when I walked out of my office, she asked me if I'd ever heard of something called Math Club. And Math Club was something started by a Harvard graduate named Ronnie Brunn in LA years ago. I don't know if it's still happening. If it isn't, we should reconstitute it. And
let's do it now.
We should do it now, yeah. And I said, I don't. What is this Math Club thing? And she said, well, here. And she handed me a Post-it that had a time, a place, and an address on it, and a date on it. And I was like, wow, well played. Now I'm intrigued. I'm going to this random thing. And I walk in, and it's just a bunch of mostly frat guys. There were a few women there, and they were all drinking beer and hanging out in this just apartment in West LA. And all of a sudden, somebody started giving a math lecture about the rule of threes in comedy. And it turned out what Math Club were comedy writers. And a lot of them were really good comedy writers on well-known shows, Simpsons, South Park, whatever, who were all former math majors.
I love it.
And the crossover between math and law and science and our industry, it's all there. So yeah, anybody out there who has heard you need to get a real job, you need to study something real, we've all heard it. It's all I hear all day long with creatives that I talk to around the world through Catalyst. Don't listen to it. The people who tell you that don't know what they're talking about, and they certainly don't know how creating film and TV work. So.
I think that's such a huge problem we have, is that commercially people assume the entertainment industry is one thing that it totally is not. At the end of the day, it's a business like anything else. It's show business, and people forget that part of it. But I completely agree. I think having, I like you, and I'm an overachiever. I was a double major, double minor in college. I was like, let's learn everything. Let's feed my mind with as much stuff as I could, and being able to look at and learn differently, because at least in college, I felt that because I had different majors that weren't creative, I was learning practical business structure. I was learning interpersonal relationships. I was learning problem solving at a level that a lot of my friends who were in the traditional creative majors were not getting that. And I felt like that left them at a disadvantage. And I'm so grateful to have had such a well-rounded thing. And I agree. I think problem solving and looking at the world differently and utilizing your intellect to overcome obstacles is something that I think a lot of creatives feel like they can't have. There's some like rigidity of thinking they assume comes with having like a practical back end of a backstory in their learning career. What the fact is, it's like you can be creative and you could be a total nerd and like love all these like sciences and maths and stuff, and it's wonderful for you. You don't have to just be strictly creative. I'm grateful for the experience. I think it's so fascinating that you have this. And yes, from what you said, math club should definitely be a thing. So if anyone's out there listening, please let's make this a thing.
Seriously, if Ronnie's not doing it anymore, we need to have a Catalyst Math Club start up again. So
definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
It's interesting. Part of my day job right now, jumping off something you mentioned there that I think we all run into as producers and folks in our industry, is we're one of the few industries where we work at the intersection of arts and business and construction and physical labor. When we first got to Duluth and started explaining how our industry works, there were a lot of people who were confused as to why electricians would be working with actors, or not with, but on the same job. Like that didn't make sense to a lot of people. The notion that a contractor is going to build something that a writer then uses is so. We've been doing a lot of education with local politicians and community leaders and business leaders to explain that the production industry is massive, and the investment you make in actors, writers, directors, producers, all the above the line creative folks is what drives the story engine that ends up then being produced by all the below the line folks, right? And it's fascinating to me how sometimes we talk about the flyover states or the coastal divide or the red-blue divide, and it's really interesting to be in a place like Duluth, the Midwest, where the conversation isn't that it's arts versus business or versus commerce. It's that business and commerce have never understood that the arts are an industry. And so as soon as we start describing the arts as an industry, all kinds of light bulbs start to turn on, gateways start to be open, pathways are built, and I think that's what we're seeing, this confluence of events. Is it's not just Catalyst being a place where a writer brings a script to get notes on and maybe win an award or something. It's where creators come to move their career forward, but also start getting their thoughts and creative ideas actually produced, and creating that intersection outside of a virtual world, but in our physical real life planet is a fascinating twist of events that I think is going to make Catalyst and Duluth, pop out on everybody's radar in a big way over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about what Catalyst is in a second, but I think what you just mentioned is very important, that the arts is an impactful industry. I love this. I was telling this to my mom earlier today. I was saying, like, I don't know why I was younger, I didn't think that being a producer was a possibility. I wanted to be an actor. You only can do these things to be an actor. You can't go straight, you can't like so many different things. And because I've had so many interests, I really learned that the arts is an industry. And if you want to understand the impact of arts, I always like to talk about the fact that during the Great Depression, there was a New Deal created for the arts. It's an industry that people respect, that people need. It's not so much about, it creates jobs, it provides emotions, it connects people together, it's storytelling, it brings opportunities. There's so much that can happen with the arts, especially to like little pockets and locations. So speaking of little pockets and locations, let's talk about Duluth and Catalyst. So for those that don't know, obviously I know a lot about it, but I think that what would be great is, why don't you explain what Catalyst is and why you felt it was important to create something like Catalyst, or continue to carry the torch of what Catalyst is?
Yeah. So when AJ and Jenny started ITV Fest in 2006, the premise was very simple. There were no places for independent writers to take their pilots. There were plenty of film festivals, film schools, right? We all know Sundance, Tribeca, Tisch, USC, pick your place. But when you started looking at avenues for episodic creators, there were zero. So that was the first problem to fix, is let's just build a gateway. Let's just build a place where creatives get to show up at the doorstep and go, hey, I've got a TV idea. What do I do with it? Over the years, Catalyst has evolved to expand and include all narrative, episodic, serialized content of any media format. So basically, as long as you're not creating a film, bring it to us. AR, VR, short form, long form, animation, kids, talk shows, unscripted, scripted, comedy, drama, podcast, whatever, stuff we haven't thought of yet, formats you've only dreamt up, at night in your bed. We're really becoming this repository and place for experiential and non-film formatted content. And the reason for that is not just because we're trying to be cool and different, but there is an entirely different creative process that goes into creating something that's a film versus creating something that is narrative or episodic in nature. When you're dealing with a film, you're dealing with something that's closed. It has a beginning, a middle, and end. Formula is pretty much there, right? You've got a couple of different storylines, you've got a couple of different acts, you've got a couple of different twists. We all know how films work. Financiers are really comfortable with film. They understand film budgets and timelines and distribution methods. And, there's the pre-sale ability on a film and all these well-defined things. And the reason for that is simple. Film is a finished product when you go to sell it. If I am asking you to invest in or to buy my film, you can watch my film and decide whether you like it and if you want to buy it. That makes it real simple. It's like going to a car lot. You can see the car, you can test run it, you can drive it around and say, yeah, I like this car, I want to buy it. Great. There's a marketplace for that. When you look at things that are not films, it is so random and it is so difficult to sell because you're not asking somebody to buy something you completed. You're asking them to buy into a concept that maybe you've made a pitch deck, maybe you wrote a couple of episodes script, maybe you've even shot a pilot or a trailer, maybe you even made the first season. You have not completed the show because you don't even know how long it's going to end, right? Imagine if you were trying to get an investor to invest in a building and they asked you, how many stories high is it? And your answer was, I don't know, let's see how long it goes, right? That's insane. How long is it going to take to make this building? I don't know. How long you want to go for? That's insane. So from a pure business perspective, narrative and episodic content is so much more difficult to make that it needs its own world and its own realm and its own way of procedures, if you will. The problem is for the creators out there, the big legacy media companies, your networks and studios, they are still kind of stuck in the old model. We only work with the writers and people we've already known. We want big star names. We want things that win Emmys and Oscars. We want things that are going to end up in Variety every day, blah, 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 right? That's their business model. So giving new voices an opportunity is not, for the most part, a big part of any major legacy media company's business model. They add on little things here and there in director programs and access programs and things like that. But are they really taking all the top level new voices out there and giving them primetime shows? No. They're putting them in writers' rooms or letting them shadow on directors, right? So that entire creative universe of non-film structured content needs a place to go where we can all meet each other, we can all work with each other, we can all figure out who likes to work with whom. And the answer to the problem of why would anybody invest in your project if it's narrative and structure, if it's so unknown, how long it lasts, how many episodes there are, blah, 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 is it's relationship based. And the number one thing that we see at Catalyst is creators come to us out of the film model mindset, which is they focus their pitch decks on their plot and their characters. And I'm like, that's great. I care about that last. The thing I care about first is you, who you are, who you've worked with, what your interest level is, what your knowledge and experience levels are. The second thing I care about is the story world that you're creating, the world around these characters, the world in which these characters live. Because the first thing that's going to happen if your story and your IP gets optioned or bought, is you're going to end up in a writer's room with 10 other random people you probably haven't met before, and they're going to rewrite most of the dialogue and most of the plot points anyway. So what happens on episode 7 to the main character doesn't really matter to me as much as, are you going to be a cool person to work with for 10 years? And Sundance and Tribeca and these other bigger film companies, they're not built to do what we do, which is a lot of one-on-one work with folks.
I think I really want to talk about the fact, everything you mentioned. You talked about the fact that content creators that are wanting to jump into this world of episodic storytelling, whether it's unscripted or narrative content. I think that you're right. They think so much about making something clever. It's got this clever plot. It's got this clever twist and all these things that are cute and clever, but they forget to really present themselves and why we should invest in you, why we should do these things. And on this podcast, I like to always make a transition on the fact, the point of this podcast is not just content, but the consequences of content and the things that people forget to think about and ends up being a huge problem at the end. Like, I think a lot of projects, for example, don't get made because there's a huge learning curve between somebody that's creative and the industry members are trying to connect you. There seems to be a disconnect. And maybe that stems from what we were saying earlier about this whole idea of that if you're creative, you have to get a normal job. A normal job's gonna support you, but being creative, nothing's going to happen. So you dive so much into being creative, you forget that it's a business and want to do that. So what are some other things you were mentioning that you've seen that content creators or, aspiring content creators of any capacity, but specifically episodic content, what do you think that there are some problems that they just completely skim over?
Yeah, I think the problems aren't of their own making.
Agreed.
I think the problems are a result of the industry time to invest in creating education and pipeline opportunities in the way that exist on the film side. We're trying to fill all those gaps at once, which is why we work 20 hours a day. And I think the number one problem is the lack of understanding that the story world is the story engine is what drives a series. It's not the characters. And I know that sounds weird, but it really is more the heart of why is an audience going to want to tune back in again and again and again, maybe sometimes in rapid succession if you're binging. And that's a different question than if somebody who's writing a film has to answer, right? When you're creating a film, you need to keep attention for 90 minutes, give or take. That's not the way series work. Even if you look at something like Avengers, I look at Avengers as a series. And I know that they did them in film format, but we all know the original IP was started as comic books. And it started as an open-ended narrative world in the creator's mind. And so that's number one mistake. And then number two, the just lack of understanding of how the TV production process works at a technical level in terms of the job of a writer and the job of a director. So many creators think that if they're it means that they're in charge of the entire project because the writer and director are in charge of the film set. No, if you're a writer on a series, you're one of many writers on staff. If you're the director in a series, you're literally just one of a bunch of directors who are directing episodes week after week. And so there's both creative and technical things to learn. But again, I don't put that blame on the creators. I put it on the industry. And that's part of the reason that we're partnering up with folks like the TV Academy and the Daytime Emmys and others to start this process of filling in those knowledge gaps before creators go down the road of spending $100,000 of their own money making a pilot.
Please don't do that. Please. I'm begging you, please do not do that.
Yeah, we see the industry evolving on that. International markets, Mexico around buying up pilots and independent shot series and distributing them on air as is. They're not rewriting them. They're not redeveloping them. But the notion of, going out and taking a second mortgage to produce a pilot, it should be the last thing on your to-do list, not the first. There's so much more to do. And I can tell you the best way to produce is with somebody else's money. And so once you get to the point that somebody else is investing in your IP and in bringing your project to life, you have at that point so many more places to go with it. And it, you don't have to go to bed at night feeling like, oh my God, if I don't go to Catalyst and sell my show within 48 hours of meeting everybody, the whole thing's a total failure, which is, again, this weird film festival mindset everybody has of the consequences of your, the timeline's supposed to, you create your show, you bring it to a festival, you sell the show. And that's modeled after the Sundance model of films. That's stupid. It doesn't work that way. And it shouldn't work that way. And what a creator really should be thinking is, I want to be involved with something like Catalyst through the Institute side, which is our year-round process where you get to do classes, go to seminars, meet people, build relationships, network with them, talk about your show, pitch it to dozens and dozens of people, get a bunch of feedback, incorporate that feedback, build a team, writers and producers and directors and folks that are all want to be involved and working with you on the project. Put together a really great pitch deck, revamp it 17,000 times, maybe shoot a trailer, go to the festival, meet more people, and it's like a multi-year process. Mm-hmm. And I think creators don't like everything I just said because they just want it to be as simple as, I made my show, I go to a festival,
give me money,
and I sell it, give me money.
Yeah.
Look, is that possible? Could you be the miracle one that pulls that off? Sure. Good luck. But until the first person does it, where somebody goes to a festival with a pilot, sells it to NBC, and NBC turns around and doesn't touch it and puts it on air as you gave it to them, and it magically wins all the Emmys, until that happens, sorry, there's going to be this other process involved in the way.
Yeah, I think, it's so funny to me now being in the thick of it, because a lot of people don't really educate themselves on, like you said, the technical aspect of what it is to create a show, and also what it is to create a film, but more specifically to, TV series. You mentioned earlier about YouTube, how there was a period of time where YouTube did not exist. And we all remember those days. It was like the mid-MySpace days, and I think that YouTube in itself really helped push a lot of things along. But people don't realize it takes 10 years for overnight success to happen. YouTube, it took 10 years for it to become successful. And now the way that people digest content because of YouTube has impacted social video, has impacted streaming networks, has impacted the way the networks even roll out content and find content. And I think that people who come and have these pilots made, nobody that are successful, let's talk like that from that, that's an archaic way of doing business. But in today's standards, like, you don't know how long that person has been putting in the prep work to get to that place. Not many people are willing to invest in the time. That's why I think it's so wonderful that you have the whole educational component, because I think that people need to understand that although it's under the umbrella of entertainment and it's under the umbrella of production, building a kind of like chapter-esque format of a project that costs a lot of money, because production costs a lot of money, or it can cost a lot of money. You have to modify it for the medium that you're working towards. And I don't think a lot of people think beyond just their pilot. That's why I've openly spoken about this. I probably say this on every podcast, but that's why I'm so anti-pilot, because I think it's the archaic way of doing business that people, for some reason, are not willing to disrupt their thinking to go beyond that.
Yeah, I think there's arguments on both sides. I think the pro pilot argument is, and I know this from a festival side, it helps us know the world that you see in your head, and it helps us answer the question, are you capable of pulling it off? Now, pilot might be the wrong word, maybe trailer or teaser, or even if it's 5 or 10 minutes. But you learn a lot real quickly if somebody has a really great story world in their head, but doesn't understand how audio works on a set. You're like, okay, great, we'll help you stick to the writing. And I think that's part of I think that's the heart of what Catalyst is all about, in the discussion that you constantly have about pilots and whatnot, is on the series side, the point of an organization like Catalyst and our festivals and our institutes is to help organize the industry. And it's to help figure out, where are you at? Where are you trying to get to? And what are the legitimate middle steps between those two things? Because getting an agent and selling your show to Netflix are not two intermediary steps that help you get anywhere from anywhere to anywhere. Those are things that come after. Those are things that are a result of you already having done a whole bunch of stuff. And those are things that, even if they were to happen to you the first time out of the gate, don't necessarily make any sense. And I think the reason I say that is, so many creators who get agents tell me they have to work harder to find their own work after they get an agent than they did before they had one. The notion that an agent's job is to go out and sell you all day long is a little bit of a misnomer. Yes, some do that. No, that's not the norm. And so I think that's why Catalyst is so important, because we give everybody the chance to get together, whether it's virtually twice a year, or you decide to join a pitch session, or whether you show up to every seminar every other week, or whether you go to the festival once a year, whatever it is, you get the chance to build those relationships quicker. Instead of moving to LA or New York for 10 years and hanging around and spending thousands in rent every month, you can join Catalyst from anywhere around the planet and build those networks faster. But we're also always working in the background to figure out, okay, you're a writer. You should be meeting people who work with writers. It's not, oh, you're a writer, so you should be meeting every producer and every financer that's out there. And helping organize in a way that makes it more efficient. I don't know why the television side of the industry hasn't done this already. And every day I have a moment where I am baffled that we're the ones working on this. I'm happy we're the ones working on it, because I think we have our heart in the right place, and I think we're good stewards of this problem. But it's a problem that needs to be solved, and needs to be solved faster than it's happening. Because I think once everything gets organized, life becomes easier for creators, because now all of a sudden there isn't this big nebulous black cloud hanging over my head on the television side of, what do I do next? Now there's a pathway. I go do this, and then I do this, and then I do this. And I know that if I get off track or start going the wrong direction, Catalyst will be there to nudge me back on course. And that's kind of what we're working on.
Yeah, I think Catalyst is so fascinating, and that's why we were so adamant at working together, because I agree. I think our missions are in a place where it's not. I think the biggest exciting thing for me about Catalyst is that it's community oriented. It's an institute. It has community pockets. Writers should be finding other writers where they can work together in achieving their next goals. It shouldn't be about shopping everywhere. I think that the two problems that really came up for me when you were talking was, number one, like, my issue with pilots is not that I think it's like a means to an end. It's that I think people make them for the wrong reasons. They get so focused for some reason about the money factor, making it for a certain money quotient, versus really focusing on why you're making a pilot, what a pilot means. I love these trailers. I love these ways that people showcase like this. If you can get through what your story is in a very short period of time, it shows me that you really know your story back to front, and you really are showcasing what it means to you. And I feel like a lot of pilots are like, oh, I have to make this for $100,000 and put in all my friends that I already cast and get somebody who's a director to do it and just make it. And then a network's going to come in and just buy everything up. And I agree. And the other point that you made, which is I think a huge problem is the industry has presented themselves because of whatever powers that be came before this disrupted world that we live in now, thanks to social video and also the pandemic. But they have this whole gatekeeper concept where there's an untouchable factor, where I think what people are starting to realize is that you don't have to work with every single producer. Just because some producer has some big fancy name does not mean they are necessarily the right producer for your project. And you can have the luxury of finding people that you really feel are going to resonate with why you're making the story and where to go for that story and what kind of stories are being pushed through. And I think one thing that Catalyst does very well is it establishes, like, this is what's happening today, and this is how you can learn about doing stuff, and this is where you can find other people like you, and you can understand that these problems are universal. Who's going to hear it? How are we going to make it?
And that the greatest piece of advice I've ever learned, and it's not like it came from one person in one moment, it's kind of an amalgamation of 20 years of experience, is just the first thing a creator needs to think about when making a series is, why are they making it?
Yes.
What's the motivation for wanting to do this? And look, vanity, fame, and money are perfectly valid reasons, but they probably won't fuel you for too long. The why has to be something, I always hear, well, it's my way of impacting the world. It's the way of having my voice heard or my stories and ideas heard. And that's obviously the heart of what we all do. But the why can be anything. It could be super specific. It could be, I have a family member who's sick and I need to create this story to memorialize them while also making money to pay their medical bills. That's a great why, right? That will fuel you every day to wake up and figure your way through the industry. Whatever it is, you got to know your why first. And then the second thing you have to figure out is who's your audience for this. And as a creator, I always hated this question when I was growing up, learning writing. I was like, it's for everybody. My story is for everybody. My story is universal, and any human on the planet could listen to my story and get out of it exactly what I'm trying to tell. And that's just not true. The who is very important, because that's going to help shape and guide who you choose to talk to, who you present to for potential writing partners and producing partners. So many online kind of webby YouTube creators create a series because they know how to with their phones. And then after putting up some episodes, they discover, I get a really great response from audiences in Brooklyn. And they're like, something is resonating with this Brooklyn audience. So I'm going to keep making stuff that's based on Brooklyn. And then they kind of do it backwards. They do the why last and the who second. So you need to figure out your why first, then you need to figure out who you're talking to, and then the how actually comes last. And I think sometimes that rush to how, that rush to film, that rush to get stuff made, it can set people up for disappointment. It's also very exciting, and it's undeniably exciting as a creator to have that first moment either at home in your editing bay or on a local movie theater screen where you and your friends and family and cast and crew are watching something you just made and you're seeing your show come alive. So I get the adrenaline rush, and it's junk food for the soul, right? But I think for longer term picture career building purposes, a lot of the people I've seen have success at all different levels have had really good fuel for the long run because they know their why, and because people are attracted to people who know their why. It's what helps makes you unique. It's what helps make your story unique. And it's also the thing that, from a creative side, puts my mind at rest when sometimes the whole thing can seem so hopeless and so difficult, because the only person who gets to determine your why is you. It's actually up to you, which puts you back in the driver's seat. And as maddening as the industry can be, you really are in control of you and your own story. And that's exciting. As when we're working with a lot of the international creators right now, they are facing so many issues abroad, politically, financially. Obviously, coronavirus is a whole nother level of crazy. That the why and their ability to control what they do sometimes isn't in their control because of the way their governments function or whatnot. And so they have to find a different why. And I find sometimes the international creators are even more hyper fueled because they have to break through these extra barriers first. And magic happens when people get together who all have a similar why and a similar desire to create and tell stories. And that's what happens at the festival every year, and at a lot of these smaller events we do throughout the year too. But I would say that's my kind of closing advice: is figure out your why first, then your who, and the rest will kind of follow.
Yeah, I definitely think it's so wonderful you say all that, because when being an entrepreneur, which we're both in business, right? One of the big things that you talk about, what we learn is, what is the why of your business, right? And in show business, when you create a film or you create a TV series, you create a production company, that's a business. You're running a business. And Simon Sinek has this whole thing about why and why in business and why the mission should be there. To me, it's no different than when you're creating something. You have more control of your why. And I agree. I think people keep worrying about how is this going to get made, not why should we be making it? Because if you are so authentic with your ask, I guarantee the how will change and grow and modify, and you might even invite more people because you're so authentic. And if it is, like you said, if it's a vanity project because you want to be the next whatever star, or you want to showcase everyone you're a great director, be honest about it, and then have people support you in that vision by bringing other people on board who also are looking to, aspire in their career. Like TV projects are so wonderful because they're community-based that can last forever. I mean, going back to Game of Thrones, see how long Game of Thrones lasted, and now the spin-offs and this and the resurgence of the book series. I really, really want to highlight, you mentioned multiple times about the international world when it comes to this. And I think a lot of US-based creatives forget there is a massive world out there where media translates and where they're digesting it in different platforms and OTT and Netflix and this, and Netflix has it's different in every country. And I think people forget there's more than just Netflix, and people forget we're creating stories in more than just maybe North America. What have you seen are some of the biggest differences between international content and content here?
It's a great question. I think the biggest difference is you'd be amazed at how many countries have absolutely no infrastructure for our creative industry at all. I mean, zero. I mean, not even a film school to go to. I think what amazes me about most of the international markets is how self-taught and how widely experienced so many of the creators are, because that's the only way that they had to be able to learn and get by was reading books, following tutorials online, doing it themselves. And there's a little bit more rawness to their stories and to their projects just because they aren't polished and they don't look at it through a US market lens at all. I find a lot less fear in the stories that international creators tell. And I don't mean fear necessarily in a bad way. I just mean, I think that in the US market, creators can get so caught up with trends. And so many writers will sit down and think, all right, I'm going to create my series right now. What's selling? And what can I write that's similar to what's selling right now? And that's a luxury that we have in the US market because we do have this defined infrastructure, so to speak, although I just spent 30 minutes complaining about how the TV side has no infrastructure. And I think that's the biggest difference is a lot of the US creators are more commonly looking for reassurance in their ideas, whereas a lot of the international creators are like, no, this is my idea, this is how it goes. And what I find fascinating on the flip side is US creators tend to have much more understanding about the longevity of the process and the power of the process and the reason why it's worth not playing the game, but tolerating the game, if you will. Whereas a lot of the international creators don't have any understanding of the business process side. So there's trade-offs. If you were to ask me, would I rather work with a US-based creator or an international creator? I'd say I want a team that has both, because the strengths and weaknesses are both different, and I think that they complement each other really well. I think that's why you're seeing a lot of US creators have tremendous success internationally and vice versa. The marketplaces are just so different. And I also think one of the misnomers that even I have to stop, we all have to start, stop ourselves from doing this, and I have to stop as well, is lumping the international market as to being the international market, as if it's one market. Every single country is a totally different market with a totally different infrastructure and totally different way of doing things. And until we start realizing that and accepting that for as it is, I think we're all doing ourselves a disservice creatively. For example, I was on a call this morning with one of the new Institute members from South Korea, who is actually a Black man from Chicago. But he's been a Korean resident now for decades and worked there growing up in the TV market. And the notion of presenting him as a Korean creator is accurate because that's where his adult life and creative impetus all come from. But it's not something that I don't think our industry is really fully, our industry's still just figuring out how to integrate the people of color and LGBTQ community and all of these things, never mind starting to mix the equation up even more. So I think, together as US and international creators, the more that they work together and the more that we lower these barriers between markets, I think creators are going to start finding opportunities all over the place that they never, ever, ever imagined existed for them before. One of the biggest lessons I've learned in working with creators around the world over the last decade is audiences are most interested in stories that connect with themselves, but come from somewhere else. The foreign is sexy, and foreign doesn't not necessarily mean, even necessarily mean a different country. It just means a different point of view. And so when you go and tell a story to the Nigerian market that comes from the US Midwest that would be boring and normal place in Oklahoma, it's very exciting to some people in a Nigerian market, for example, and vice versa. So it's fascinating, and I think it's kind of the cutting edge of where the episodic industry is headed. Is how do we handle the international market, and how do we all play in the sandbox together?
I think that all those points are so wonderful. I know that when I went to Seoul a few years ago, that's what really opened my eyes, that around the world in different culture pockets, like in Southeast Asia and in Asia and Eastern Europe and South America and even Canada, they're all writing these different stories, and short form digital content was a norm. And now it's finally coming here. And I think the US is starting to get imbued with all these different cultures. And I could talk to you for hours about all of this, but before we go, I very much would love you to talk about, when is Catalyst? How can people attend Catalyst? And where can they find out more information about you?
Yeah, the plug.
It's plug time.
365 days a year. Anybody can register for the Institute any day. The festival event is in Duluth, Minnesota, the last week of September every year. So this year it's September 29th through October 2nd. You can head to catalyststories.org or .com. We have both because we're cool. And just get involved. If you don't want to attend the Institute, or you don't want to go to the festival yet, there'll start to be in-person COVID events around the country again. There'll start to be in-person events around the country again after COVID is allowed.
It was like in-person COVID events. I don't want to go there.
Exactly the way you should not say it.
It's okay.
And post-COVID is where my brain went. And I think those are great ways for people to just show up to a mixer and start, getting involved with the community. Just because Catalyst isn't yet a Nike level brand name or a Sundance level brand name doesn't mean that the people who are in it are all new and rookies. We have tremendous people and talent that are involved with Catalyst at all levels. Yes, some of them are college kids that are brilliant. Others are Emmy winners who and you've watched their shows on a daily basis, and they have projects that they don't know where to go with. So it runs the gamut, and I encourage everybody to just show up, hang out, get involved, and meet some people. That's the way to build your career.
Well, Philip, I just want to say thank you so much. I think what you're doing is so fascinating, and it might not be Sundance now, but I've been telling everybody that it's going to surpass it. I believe that Catalyst is truly just a wonderful resource to both experienced and novice creators, and definitely get involved. I know that I'm looking forward to being in Duluth at the end of September and getting more involved with Catalyst. Thank you for everything. And for everyone listening, thank you for joining us for another episode of Content and Consequences, and I will see you later.